Orders were clear. The plan was precise. But the battlefield did not follow either. As forces moved inland, decisions began to contradict each other. What failed first was not the front line, but control itself. By mid-1943, the war in Europe had entered a new phase. North Africa had fallen. The Allies were searching for a way into mainland Europe. Italy appeared to be the weakest point. Politically unstable. Militarily stretched. Geographically complex. The decision was made to land there. The plan depended on speed and coordination. Command believed Italian resistance would collapse quickly. Intelligence reports suggested confusion within Italian leadership. There was optimism. Too much optimism. In early September, Allied forces prepared for a major amphibious landing on the Italian mainland. The operation was placed under centralized command. Orders were detailed. Timetables were precise. Assumptions were dangerous. Italian terrain worked against control. Narrow coastal plains rose quickly into hills and mountains. Roads were few. Radio communication was unreliable. Units would be spread out immediately after landing. At the same time, political events disrupted military planning. Italy signed an armistice with the Allies on September 8, 1943. The announcement was sudden. Poorly coordinated. Italian units received no clear instructions. Some disbanded. Some resisted German forces. Others did nothing. Command believed this would reduce resistance. Instead, it created chaos. German forces reacted faster than expected. They moved to occupy key positions. Defensive lines were formed inland. Counterattacks were prepared. Allied command underestimated the speed of this response. On the beaches near Salerno, the landings began under heavy fire. Units came ashore under unclear conditions. Naval gunfire support was delayed or misdirected. Air cover was inconsistent. Command messages conflicted. Some divisions advanced inland as planned. Others stalled. Some received orders to hold positions. Others were told to push forward. Communication between corps and divisions failed repeatedly. Commanders on the ground made independent decisions. They had to. Orders from higher command arrived late or not at all. The unified plan began to fracture. German counterattacks struck vulnerable points. Units that believed flanks were secure found themselves exposed. Reinforcements were delayed due to congestion on the beaches. Medical evacuation slowed. Command headquarters struggled to understand the situation. Reports contradicted each other. Maps were outdated. Lines of advance no longer matched reality. Control was slipping. Not because the enemy was invisible, but because the command structure could not adapt quickly enough. By the end of the first days, the operation was still alive. But it was no longer fully directed. Decisions were being made in isolation. The operation had begun to move on its own. As the fighting intensified, the gaps in command became impossible to ignore. Units fought bravely, but without shared awareness. Requests for artillery support crossed paths with retreat orders. Airstrikes were called in on uncertain positions. German forces pressed hard. Counterattacks targeted command seams. Supply routes were cut or delayed. Ammunition shortages appeared faster than expected. Medical stations were overwhelmed. Allied command attempted to regain control through rigid orders. This only worsened the problem. Orders assumed conditions that no longer existed. Units could not comply even if they wanted to. Radio traffic increased. Clarity did not. Some units advanced into villages without knowing neighboring units had pulled back. Others dug in, waiting for reinforcements that had been diverted elsewhere. Command decisions were based on incomplete information. Naval commanders hesitated to commit ships closer to shore. Air commanders debated priorities. Ground commanders argued for immediate support. Coordination slowed. German artillery targeted beaches and assembly areas. Casualties rose. Morale became uneven. Some formations held firmly. Others began to fracture under pressure. Attempts to reorganize command lines failed. Staff officers moved between headquarters under fire. Messages were delayed or lost. Control maps were rewritten repeatedly. At one point, a major counterattack nearly pushed Allied forces back into the sea. Emergency naval gunfire saved the beachhead. This response came not from planning, but necessity. The operation survived through improvisation. Junior officers took initiative. Small unit leaders adapted. This kept the line intact. But it further disconnected the operation from centralized control. Command no longer directed events. It reacted to them. By now, German defenses had stabilized. The opportunity for rapid breakthrough was gone. What had been planned as a swift operation became a grinding fight. Losses mounted. Equipment was abandoned. Positions were held without clear strategic purpose. The original plan was no longer relevant. The command structure remained in place. But authority without awareness meant little. The operation continued. But control had already been lost. The critical moment came when multiple German counterattacks struck simultaneously. Allied units, already stretched, faced coordinated pressure. Some sectors bent. Others broke temporarily. Command issued contradictory orders. Advance. Hold. Withdraw. Messages overlapped. Time gaps widened. In one sector, units pulled back without informing adjacent formations. This created exposed flanks. German forces exploited them quickly. Casualties peaked during this phase. Medical evacuation routes collapsed under fire. Field hospitals operated beyond capacity. Names were recorded hastily. Some not at all. Naval gunfire again prevented collapse. Ships fired at close range. Ammunition stocks dropped. Risk increased. Air support arrived sporadically. Pilots lacked clear ground coordination. Targets were marked late. Opportunities were missed. Command attempted a final reorganization. New boundaries were drawn. New priorities set. But the battlefield had already reshaped itself. What stopped the collapse was not command recovery. It was exhaustion. German forces reached their limits. Supply shortages slowed their advance. Momentum faded. The beachhead held. But the cost was heavy. Losses far exceeded projections. Units were depleted. Equipment destroyed or abandoned. The original strategic objectives were delayed. The operation succeeded only in the narrowest definition. Control had not been restored. It had been replaced by endurance. By the time stability returned, the moment had passed. What could have been decisive became just another phase. Command never fully acknowledged the failure. Reports emphasized resilience, adaptation, courage. They did not emphasize loss of control. History moved forward. The fighting did not conclude with a clear signal or a decisive order. Instead, it gradually lost intensity, as movement slowed and contact became sporadic. Positions hardened not because command had fully reasserted itself, but because both sides had reached the limits of what they could sustain. The battlefield settled into stillness before understanding returned. In the days that followed, headquarters worked to restore the appearance of order. Command posts were reorganized, communication protocols standardized, and maps corrected to reflect the ground as it truly existed. Reports were rewritten with greater clarity than the situation had ever possessed in real time. On paper, the structure appeared intact again. Units that had borne the worst of the confusion were quietly reshuffled. Some were reinforced and sent forward. Others were merged into larger formations. A few ceased to exist as independent entities, absorbed without comment. Their experiences were condensed into brief summaries that captured outcomes but not uncertainty. Casualties were recorded with administrative precision. Numbers replaced sequences of events. Individual actions were difficult to trace, and many were never examined at all. The moments when orders contradicted one another, or failed to arrive entirely, were treated as temporary disruptions rather than defining features of the operation. In official histories, the operation was described as a necessary and ultimately successful step in the Italian campaign. The beachhead held. The advance continued. Momentum was regained. These conclusions left little room for the period when command had lost control of unfolding events. Those who acted on initiative without guidance were rarely acknowledged. Those who waited for direction that never came left no trace in the record. Confusion was absorbed into broader language about friction, pressure, and adaptation. The absence of control was reframed as endurance. As the campaign moved north, attention shifted to new battles and larger decisions. This operation receded into the background, overshadowed by events that followed. Its failures were not dramatic enough to demand reflection, and its survival allowed it to pass without scrutiny. The coastline where it unfolded returned to quiet routine. Temporary structures were dismantled. Tracks faded. The ground retained no memory of hesitation or misdirection. What remained was a name and a date, preserved without detail. The loss of control itself did not endure, not as a lesson or a warning, but as a moment left unexamined, fading quietly from history. Thank you for watching. New historical stories are published regularly.